Hey, yo, what up? So this month I kind of wanted to dive into some really unusual granulator type things you can do in Ableton, mostly involving simpler and sampler. Excuse me. Because you can actually use simpler and sampler as granulators, and it gives you a lot of more interesting things to do with them. Some different interesting, I don't know, approaches to granulating sound. Everyone knows about Granulator 2, right? Like that's the one I feel like everyone uses. Or, there's also things like Portal. Portal's a granulator as well. This one's pretty cool. But they all do different things in their own way, and simpler and sampler are no exception to that rule. Let's just start with sampler, because the sampler, while cool, is also kind of a little bit less flexible of a granulator compared to simpler. Just make a nice C3, so whatever sample we put in plays back at that pitch. And I'm going to drag just a break sample in here, some cashmere break. There we go. All right, cool. So here's the thing. It would be amazing. Well, first of all, how granulator works is that a little grain is played over and over and over and over again. Now we need a way to do that. There's no way to do that here except if we were to use like an arpeggiator. So both of these will involve an arpeggiator in front of it. You can turn it to free mode. And then we got more of like that grain sound. So that's like step one. Put an arpeggiator in front of it so we're continually playing back. Now, you know how most granulators allow you to kind of scan through at a certain rate to the sample? Well, that would be awesome if we could do that. Something like this. Right? We can hear that sound happening already. That grainy kind of playback. But there's no way to automate this. You can't automate the sample start. You can't put an LFO on here and map it. So super annoying, right? What do we do about that? Well, there actually is a way. What we can do is go over to our modulation section over here, turn on the auxiliary envelope, and set the auxiliary envelope to the sample offset. Now, if I turn this up to 100, now this peak range right here will control where the sample starts playback at. That's pretty dope, right? Now we can go ahead and add let's just go up. So we kind of scan through it forwards, right? Turn this straight way down here. And I'm going to map this to the peak. And peak is what's going to change where it's playing back from. And now check this out. We turn the rate way down. We get kind of a granulator type sound. There we go. That's our basic grain setup here. So the rate is kind of our scan playback rate. Okay. If you want it to go backwards, then just switch it to a down. Or you can hit reverse. And maybe we'll switch this back to up. There we go. That will kind of like do a reverse grain type thing. Now I think you can actually add an LFO to that. Yes. So what you can do is set this to binary, bin, B-I-N, binary mode. This is like a random on and off. Turn the rate up here. And now what it's going to do is either randomly play it forward or backwards. So that's kind of like your random forward-backwards grain. So that's pretty neat. Kind of glitched. There we go. I'm going to turn this off for now, just to kind of go through this. So this is your sample playback rate. This is how you set up either forward or reverse samples. This rate right here is like your grain size, or your grain rate, your grain playback rate, I should say. And then the gate is your grain size. You can have overlapping grains by turning the gate up to over 100%. And now that we've done that, what we can do is, that's like the basics of it, right? Now there are certain parameters on granulators that are really useful, like things like random pitch, random pan. So this will randomize every time there's a MIDI note being sent to it from the arpeggiator. It will randomly pan it somewhere. So that's kind of like a grain spread. And there's another parameter called AM, amplitude modulation. That's a pretty classic grain effect. But there's really no good way to do that on here. Now we do actually have an amplitude modulation oscillator over here. But it doesn't act the same way. So I'm going to turn this off, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get a expression control. This is a super, super useful device. I've been using this a lot lately. I think it just comes with Ableton. And this expression control, every time a MIDI note sent to it, you can have it set out a random parameter. So I'm going to go ahead and set this over to the volume. And maybe bring this down to like 65. And maybe bring this up to like 25. So it never gets all the way quiet and never gets too loud. And now we can hear this random grain volume variations, which is lots of fun. Let's turn the voices down. That's a whole different thing too. That's super cool. And then, of course, we've got things like the filter, right? Like, this is stuff that doesn't exist in Granular. I mean, it has filters, but it doesn't have the filters with this nice distortion or multi-mode, right? I'm going to get another random here. Let's see. Where is it? Random. There we go. I'm going to map this to the filter cutoff. And I'm going to get another random, and I'm going to map this to the morph. So cool. Crazy. Let's go ahead and turn the reverse back on. Let's throw an acapella in here. And then, you know, if we want to do random pitch, then we can go ahead and throw a pitch in front of this. Or a random, I mean. That'll give us random pitches. Bidirectional, right? So it's like, here's your normal pitch. Add is either 12 choices above it. Sub is 12 choices below it. And bi is 12 choices either direction. And then we can turn that off. I mean, then because we're using arpeggiator to trigger this, that brings in a whole new slew of different ways to granulate. We can turn steps up. Maybe make this down to like a distance of 1, so on 1 semitone change. I'm going to get a little OTT saturator after this just to keep it louder. Let's make the rate a little higher. And we can also change the grain shape by using the envelope over here. So if we want like a smoother attack to each grain, we can just increase the attack time here. Release time's already set pretty long. You can turn that short, and we get like a really squared off grain. We get more of like a... like a little slope to either side of it. So there's lots of shaping in here we can do. So yeah, I love using sampler as a granulator, as like a different flavor, a different type of granulator. Sometimes it can be a little more controlled. Get some bass sounds in here. What about just like a, oh, I don't know. This is really long, but let's check this out and see what it does. Crazy. We also got this oscillator, like an FM oscillator, which is really fun to use. Again, more types of grain. I mean, I know that Granulator has an FM parameter in there as well, but it's not as extensive as this. So anyway, enough about that. Let's move on to the next one here. I want to talk about using Simpler as a granulator. And I find this to be honestly more useful than Sampler. I like Sampler better for like general sampling purposes, but Simpler is really cool. Let's put that break back in here again. So now we've got our standard break. Okay, a couple different ways to granulate. I'll show you the not as good one first, so we can move on to the better one, end on a strong note, right? So let's go ahead and switch to, let's divide it up by, what's better here? Probably just region, I think it'll be the same. So a region of 64. All right, now if we have a smaller area, if we want to do like tighter grains, then all you gotta do is move this in. So let's make that a little shorter like that. That way we can get tighter grains out of it. And then what you got to do is get, once again, an arpeggiator. That's pretty necessary. And the scanning on this is not quite as flexible. So you can grab a pitch, put the pitch in front of it, and then get an LFO. And you got to kind of lock the LFO in a little bit. Like if you want to scan through it like this, I mean, there's probably a better way to do it, but this is just the way I'm thinking of right now. I'm going to lock this to maybe like, I don't know, 35 and 65, and then map this to pitch. So you can see how we're kind of scanning through it like that. Yeah, so that's one way to granulate. It's interesting, but it's not as good as the other way. The other way to granulate would be turn off pitch. I'm gonna get rid of this LFO, go to classic mode. Now, I was saying in this sampler, we couldn't do anything like, you know, modulate the sample start time or automate the sample start time. Not so here. In the Simpler, we actually can go ahead and map parameters to the start time. You can automate it too. You can see right there, you have a little automation. So we can change where it's playing back at. Now I'm going to reduce this to half the sample length to kind of get more fine control. Yeah, so we can do that. I'm going to grab an LFO, map my LFO. Like before, this LFO is going to go ahead and act as my scanner. And then we can get looping going here. Let's turn. There we go. And I can turn like the loop length down. So what's happening is it's starting to play where I have the start time, and then it's looping this little tiny section after. I can turn the loop up a little more. And if I turn fade on, it's going to create like a smoother grain sound. I can turn the loop amount down and get even smaller grains on it. And what I like to do is I like to get an LFO, or actually what I like to do sometimes, let's just do this, it's easier. I want to map this to macro 1, map this to macro 2, map this to macro 3, and then just get like a, I don't don't even need to do that. I just hit random. Let's make this smaller. Not even getting to the loop. I need to get it so it gets to the loop. Where's that? Loop length. There we go. And like before, we got random pan. Very weird. All right, very, very strange. Now this doesn't have all of the crazy like oscillator type stuff that sampler does, but it's got a lot of the stuff the sampler has. Enough to make it really interesting and kind of a very unique, simpler sampler granulator type thing right there. Let's go ahead and turn this so it goes backwards. Backwards, 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 up, down. There we go. Get an expression control again. This is honestly just the most amazing thing for doing this kind of stuff. Random on that. Well, we'll do a morph, so something like that. We'll do a random once again. And we can change the more of the parameters of the grain, with this. It's nuts because the way this looping interacts with the playback, it's very different than the way that Granulator works. That's fascinating to me. I'm going to go ahead and actually turn this on and start messing with some parameters over in Arpeggiator. Really weird. So, there we go. That's basically it. That's kind of what I wanted to do this whole time, was just kind of show those two uses for simpler and sampler as granulators. You can do really similar stuff using things like phase plant. If anyone has phase plant, I'll just go through this really quickly. You throw a break in here, right? If you throw the sampler, then you can loop it, and you can go ahead and have, let's turn that one off. Get an LFO in here, set this to a ramp up, and have it go very slow to play back through the sample. So we'll set this to the start time of it. And then, because we have loop turned on, we did, there we go. You can turn the length of the loop down and where the loop's at. Working the way I wanted it to. Crossfade. interesting. It's like it's restarting. I don't know why that's happening, but it's only looping through it one time. Infinite? What the heck? I don't know what's going on with that. I was messing around with this yesterday and it was working. I'm probably doing something stupid and I just can't see it. But if you mess around with this enough, you can use this as a granulator as well. There's also a really cool device called 2Grains I've been playing with lately. And this one is basically 2 alternating grains. At the risk of making this very, maybe I'll make another tutorial about this at some point. I'll make a little bonus tutorial about it, just like extra little granulators that I like to use. Because the main thing about this was that I wanted to play around with the simpler and sampler to create the grains. So, yeah, bonus on this one. But I'll put a link to 2Grains. It's a cool free Max for Live granulator. It's really fun. Been loving using it lately. All right. Hopefully that was fun and useful, and hopefully that gave you some different ideas. I feel like I only really scratched the surface of what you can actually do with simpler and sampler as granulators. So dive on in and let me know if you've made anything really cool with it. Bye.